Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to continue on with this week's theme of two-parters, checking out songs that exist as a part 1 and a part 2. Today we're looking at something from an artist, a group named Sunset Rubdown Spencer Krug. We're going to be looking at the track Trumpet Trumpet Toot Toot, and we're going to follow that up with Trumpet Trumpet II, which actually comes off of a different album. I find that to be interesting and something that I think I'm going to enjoy quite a bit as we see how they develop this one idea over different parts of their creative output. So let's dive into this. This one comes off of the album Random Spirit Lover. Let's dive in and see what Sunset Rubdown Spencer Krug is bringing to the album, bringing to the table today. So we have consistent 16th notes on the guitar, a ton of reverb and compression on the snare rolls. Very static too. A lot of these ideas are stationary. Some sort of melodic movement, but melody on top of a very static foundation. It's very noisy too, but from a different direction. It's noisy in production. I'm also getting very concerned about the lack of trumpet. So rhythmic percussion is to this too. See, again, very rhythmic. I do like the sound here. The largeness of that guitar, that synth, massive reverb on it against the very small, directed, I don't know, glockenspiel sounding instrument that we had playing the melodic line there. I'm a bit flabbergasted about this. I don't know where to start with it. There is, I think, a kind of standard ish indie rock song underneath the production here. I don't think there's anything that's really strange or out of place on this track. But the way that it's put together, like I said earlier, it's noisy from a production angle. That's what makes it feel odd. So I guess we should start there then. The sound of it all. We kick it off and we have drums, bass, a guitar, a piano and or a glockenspiel, probably a keyboard that plays both. I'm not really sure. There's a few instruments that come in, drums, vocals. It's pretty much what sets up the feeling throughout the entire song as far as our instrumentation goes. They're all presented rather noisily, though. If it is a foundational idea designed for atmospheric qualities, then it usually has some sort of reverb or big compression on it, something to make it feel like a very large sound. We can hear this on the drums at the beginning, we hear this on the electric guitar in places. There at the end, we heard it on what I thought was maybe a synthesizer, maybe. It's there to fill out space, and there's a plethora of instruments that get this handed to it or are produced in such a way to sound like this. Almost everything else, though, is produced in a way that is very narrow, pointed. It cuts through all of that thick noise crafted from the massive reverb, but it's done so in like the noisiest way. It's almost as if every single one of these instruments that is given this production to cut through the noise is also given just a very narrow field of the EQ. It tends to emphasize a lot of the treble elements of the notes. I don't think there's anything dissonant about the tones themselves, but the way that they come through, I think the only word I can use is piercing, both in the way that they cut through the noise, but that they also seem to invade my ears. They're just a very sharp sound, not tonally, but production-wise. And so we either have these really flat, wide, blunt sounds or these exceptionally narrow, piercing sounds, and there really is no in between here. The vocals, I think, might be the most in between, but they also tend to feel a bit more flatter to me, being a bit more resonant. And without any of this mid sound, it feels like we have this massive gulf between the two types of tones being utilized, and that ends up feeling very noisy to me because everything is in one of two areas. There's a lot of sounds coming from these two sections, and there isn't, what would be in a clear production is a particular place for all the instruments, both in the EQ and in the staging, as well as pitch too, ensuring that all your instruments are in different areas of range, different placements in the sound. There's a lot of ideas that go into balancing a song, and this track seems to purposefully go against that and create something that is very muddy in a way that isn't necessarily dirty or gritty or lo-fi, but does still have elements of its production that create this muddiness to its listening. It creates something that feels chaotic and um, cobbled together. All the instruments feel like they're tripping over one another, even though I don't think it really is that way compositionally. And it all comes from the way it's produced. It feels like, to go back to the idea, I think musically it's pretty close to an indie rock song, but it feels like an indie rock song mixed to be a noise rock track. And that's kind of wild to me. I don't think I've heard anything like that before. Now, compositionally, we do have some melodic and harmonic ideas, but I feel like a really strong backbone to this track is rhythm. And I pointed it out there at the end, but it applies to pretty much every aspect of this song. You go back to pretty much any section and you listen, and there is a strong sense of rhythm to everything. Whether it's a constant 16th notes being played on the guitar in the opening section, or having quarter notes against eighth notes against 16th notes that we saw in the penultimate section. I don't know if we would call that a bridge because I'm kind of fuzzy on the structure on this, but the second to last section of the song, all the different instruments are using a variety of beats. They're all consistent within themselves, but they're all different when you layer them up. Quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes, and it creates this not necessarily syncopation or polyrhythmic because they're all factors of two. They're all doubling up. But it does create this varying rhythmic pulse where we have the quarter notes giving us the accent points that everybody sort of accents on, but we have varying subdivisions within that, whether we have bup 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 or bup 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 bup, and we can hear those subdivisions against the accent, and layering these various subdivisions creates a cool effect. But it is a very rhythmic approach to it. I think more interestingly that there isn't any polyrhythmic or syncopated ideas here. Every instrument is playing, for the most part, something consistent in its rhythms. It reminds me of a topic I've brought up a few times is composers being rhythmically oriented or harmonically oriented. And you can usually hear where someone's background is based on how they write. And to me, this is a very rhythmic background. This to me feels like somebody who might have started out their musical journey on drums and percussion, moving into the realm of melody and harmonic writing later on in their life, but really having a solid background of rhythmic ideas in their composition. Because there really isn't any section in here that avoids that. There's such a strong element of this rhythmic backbone that is the foundation to all of the sections. And it is a foundation. That isn't where the song stops. When we get past that and we can look at the notes and the harmonies and the chords that we have in this song, we do find some really interesting things. We have arpeggiations, we have linear melody writing, we have some pretty cool chord progressions in here. There's a lot of harmonic details in the writing, but they're all based on this foundation of rhythm. Now, I do like the chord progression. I'm not entirely sure what to make of it yet, but it does sound a bit unique for the vibe I get from the song. Again, I kind of feel like it's noise rock, but it has harmonic resonance to it. There is a little bit of dissonance on the second chord of a lot of the progressions. I'm not sure if the chord progression is identical throughout the song or if they're utilizing the same intervals of chords, just starting on different root chords, but moving the same amounts in the same direction when we go to the second chord. But the movement and the use of tension in the way that it's utilized here seems to be repeated. And there, like I said, there's a little bit of dissonance in there as well. There is some harmonic clashing, notes that just don't play well together going on in here. But it's always a blink and you miss it kind of thing. I hear it, I'm like, oh yeah, they're going for something noisy harmonically, and then they go away from it and they really allow the production to continue on with this noisy feeling. It is something where harmonic dissonance is used as a spice to augment the production dissonance that they have going on here. It's really clever, actually. It allows, if nothing else, me to enjoy rock that's a little noisier. Because, a lot of the time we listen to noise rock, yeah, it usually does have dense layers to it. Instruments might not necessarily be lining up with each other, creating a cacophony of sound, but there's always harmonic dissonance in there too, pushing it to the next level. And I really like this. This might be an entry point for me to get into noise rock, given that harmonically, it's a bit more functional than the more chaotic harmony we find in a lot of noise rock. And we do have some cool melodies that go on in here as well. A little bit of counterpoint too between guitars and vocals, although that's not, I think, a highlight of the song. It does show up a couple of times. And I mean, that's my understanding of the song. Like I said, my concept of the structure is a bit hazy. I'm not too sure how we go around ideas. The general flow of the song kind of left me confused and in a tizzy. I'm pretty sure I made some really confused faces frequently here because by the end of the song, I really didn't have a strong grasp on it. And there's a couple of ideas, the rhythmic concepts, the melodic ones, the production that stood out to me. I feel like that's all surface level. If you're coming here to get a better understanding of why this song works, I don't have that answer on a first listen. It's it's noisy, it's chaotic, it's dense, but it works in a way that tells me there's something under the surface. And I think that some of these surface level ideas, such as the use of functional harmony and melody, are these little hints. Like, yeah, there's a lot of things that are theoretically structured here, and it's probably similar underneath too. I just didn't get a good peek at that on this. There's no trumpet though. The song Trumpet Trumpet II, unless the trumpet was heavily modified. Maybe one of those distorted, compressed sounds was a trumpet. It was just, recorded through a microphone and then run through effects. But there was no traditional trumpet sound in here that I could find. And and I was really enthused. Hey, we get some trumpet tracks this week. Not just one, but two. It's a two-parter theme. And there's no trumpet. If someone wants to correct me on that, please, I'm all ears. Like I said, there's a possibility it is just disguised as another sound, but that would make me feel a lot better to know that there was a trumpet in here. I'm going to check out some lyrics on this, and then we're going to push forth into part two. Alright, so lyrically, there's a lot more structure to this than the music. I'm not entirely sure what's going on, but I think that's also because this is near the end of a concept album. But it speaks to the need for closeness between people, to have those interpersonal relationships. And I think it talks about somebody who is distant from everyone in their lives and they wish that they hadn't pushed people away. But it's all done so through theater vocabulary. It says you got to memorize all the lines, brother thespian, you'll be fine. You got to define your breath in beats, which I think is interesting because that's more of a musical idea. And we do have a little bit of music tossed in here later on saying, I'd like to throw this trumpet down and go empty-handed. But I'd say that a majority of the wordplay in here is theatric. We then come to our second stanza. Stage left enters Maggie, looking hurried with a parcel in her arms. Are you the leopard or the virgin or the child in a grown man's beard, worn out of place and hanging off his face by the time the audience cheered? that sort of assuming I know who Maggie and the leopard and the child are is what a majority of this track does. And it's why it's difficult for me to get a grasp on what exactly it's talking about. However, by the end of the song, we finally move from linear storytelling into a repeated stanza. It says, I'd like to think that the actor's never abandoned. I'd like to throw the trumpet down and go empty-handed, but the part of the virgin has been taken, so let me throw this trumpet down and go empty-handed. And that gets repeated a couple of times before finishing the track up with ahs and ohs and oohs, vocalizations that I don't particularly remember in the track, but I'm going to assume was there. I am lucky, though, that there is a pretty lengthy description of the song in general on Genius.com that tells me that Maggie is a character from a track called The Mending of the Gown, and the leopards are from Up on Your Leopard, Upon the End of Your Feral Days. That the album is about a metaphor of human relationships, using theater as the vehicle to explore that. And it does showcase this main character who is a director of this stage play and their distance to the actors within it. There's a lot of stuff in here that goes a bit over my head, seeing as this shows up. It's the penultimate track of the album. Narratively, I'm missing a lot of context. But I do think that it showcases its core message. Even if I don't understand the particulars of the narrative, the core element of not wanting to be so distant from people is shown in it, rather shown within. I can't think of the word I wanted. Whatever. One paragraph here, or I guess one sentence that stands out to me. It says, Trumpet Trumpet Toot Toot is one of the most guitar-driven songs in the album, combining fuzzy distortions with psychedelic synthesizers. The song named Trumpet Trumpet does not emphasize a trumpet. Is okay. Is okay. We're going to move on to Trumpet Trumpet II. You Go On Ahead is the song title, with Trumpet Trumpet II being in parentheses. It comes off of the Dragon Slayer album. Let's dive into this one and see what Sunset Rubdown Spencer Krug did with this, well, with this song. I don't know if it's going to revisit any of the themes or motifs, but it is a part 2, so let's dive in. Heavy reverb, rhythmic focus. I think that's the same rhythm we kicked off the first track with. This is a very different direction for the drums, though. Still very rhythmic, though. The vocals are the only instrument holding out any notes at all. And even those are very short-held notes.
And I'd like to watch the white flash of your heels as they take turns breaking the desert heat to beckon me.
It's interesting that the drop ended up being more spacious and less defined.
Navigate to hills where no musicians live, and on the way decide what bendings of your will you're willing to forgive. And I'd like to think the actors never landed.
Oh, the little chiptune stuff in the background is a nice choice.
Go on empty-handed, and I'd like to think I am not one of them, but I know I am, so I'd like to just
The moving emphasis. Fun little drum idea on the hi-hat.
You go on ahead for a while. I would like to just follow you a while. And you go on ahead for a while. I would like to just follow you a while. And when me and the boys were out, we killed 1,000 butterflies, so I put their wings into my mouth and said a prayer for our safe arrival. And then a big black car crossed our path, and I wondered whether or not that shit was empty. You go.
This is a fun little place that we went to. There's a lot more clarity in direction and more crossover between the disparate parts. Alright, very cool. Yeah, this is nice. I have a little bit of that 16th note, possibly tremolo thing over there. Very cool. I'm curious if lyrically the song is going to be a parallel to the first track, which was about a distance between this person and those around them. Musically, there was a lot of dissonance in that track. This one feels a bit more cohesive. I wonder if this is about somebody who has managed to make the gap, the distance between them and those around them, to be lesser, to bring people back into his life somehow. Because musically, I mean, there's some similarities here. Like I said, I think we start off with a very similar rhythm at the beginning of the song, but there's also many ideas in here that I feel are adapted from the first track, the way that we utilize sounds and tones, the way that melody and harmony are brought in, the rhythmic focus to a lot of the song. Many of these things could just be how the group writes music, but there's certainly parallels between these two tracks. They're just explored in a different way. What's the year difference here? 2007, 2009. That's not a long time. They might have even been back-to-back albums. Not necessarily at the... Yeah. So the other song was their second album, was from their second album. This one's from their third. And then they took a hiatus until 2023. That's a big leap. But yeah, so like... It's tough to make a call like this without knowing more about their discography and how they write, but there's definitely a feeling of, and it might have been entirely intentional, but throwing things at the wall and just kind of seeing what sticks, and even if it doesn't, just kind of sticking with it. With the first track, it feels very disparate. Many of the ideas are not locking in with the others, and there is a thematic reason for that. It could be intentional, but this sounds like taking that idea and building something positive out of it, which might indicate a compositional maturity for the group. But like I said, it could also be that they distinctly wrote something a bit more separated for that song. Maybe the rest of the songs on that album are more positively integrated. And it's just the one that has the disparate elements to it. So like I said, it's difficult for me to say that this is an evidence of a compositional maturity in the group, but I do think that this works together really well, even outside of any thematic element to it. A lot of that comes down to the ways that things link up, that they work together. The ways that when we have the two guitars and the synthesizer and the bass, that they don't feel like they're just doing separate things at the same time. The ideas all come together. What the guitar is doing on the left, its melody, where it stops playing, where the notes go, when they rise, when they fall, works well when you listen to what the left guitar is doing, when it decides to take breaks, when it rises and falls, and the two of them together come together to form this stronger idea. The harmony that comes from these dyads, the movement together or the movement apart. I really love the way that it all comes together, and it's not just the two ideas either. We have a third instrument here with the synthesizer, giving us another layer of counterpoint, another layer of harmony, creating triads instead of dyads. We do have the bass that sits underneath it all. There's not a lot of movement to it. It is primarily, it's a harmonic instrument here. We're playing root tones primarily, and we play one note until the chord changes, and then we play the next note. But what it does is create a foundation, a sort of guide or map to allow the triads on top of it to make more sense. It gives us the home so that we can feel the distance. I love it. It all just comes together in a way that elevates the sections where they're all present. It isn't cacophonous. There is a lot of moving ideas in here, and it can feel chaotic or energetic at times with so many things to pay attention to, but the end result, I think, just taking the entire song in at once and listening to all of these ideas bounce off of each other and elevate each other, creates something that is quite fascinating to listen to. It is sonically just as dense, but musically I find it to be more interesting because how everything does come together. Now, I mentioned that it still does carry some elements of the first track, and the dense layering of it is certainly one of them, but this is also another rhythmic track. I've pointed it out right there at the beginning. Many of the instruments in here are focused on rhythm. we don't really hold a note out. If a note is going to take up 2 beats, you will play it twice rather than hold the note out so that we can find this consistency. Again, whether we're talking about quarter notes, eighth notes, or 16th notes, the instruments are going to play on this constant rhythm. They're going to have melody on top of it. But the rhythm is the important thing, is the backbone to the entire song. It's what creates the general feel. I will say that the drums introduce some more interesting ideas here, changing up their rhythmic style, sometimes using syncopation, but also quickly moving between 16th notes and quarter notes and eighth notes to create something that feels rhythmically fluid, more so than the first track, which felt stagnant. It's little ideas like that on their own, if you just gave me this one song, I don't really know that I'd pay too much attention to this, but having compared it to the first track and feeling where they're the same and how they're different makes these things stand out even more. There is this common backbone to both of these songs. They're just explored in 2 different ways, one more divisive and one more congruent. And I think it's really fascinating to hear that, especially, again, if the lyrics are supposed to juxtapose it. This is a person who has made room for other people in their life, where it's not just one person against the world, it's one person with a group. It's about things working together, and so our instruments here are now working together. And I think that's just fascinating. Harmonically, there really isn't a lot of dissonance in here. I mentioned that the second chord on the first track usually introduced some sort of harmonic tension that was resolved quickly. We don't really hear any of that here. There wasn't any part where I thought, oh, that was kind of tense or it didn't sound great. There wasn't any point in that. We do have harmonic tension. It's just never done through dissonance. And I find that to be interesting as well. It allows the song to have this ebb and flow of rising and falling tension, which you need for good storytelling, but it does so completely based on harmonic properties and not through dissonant harmony. I should say it finds it through consonant harmony, not dissonant harmony. They're both properties of harmony. The other thing, though, is that we don't really have a lot of sonic tension either in the production. We certainly have some more aggressive sounds in here. Compression and fuzz are utilized in places, but we don't really have any wide sense of reverb in this track. I think we had one sound that used it for a moment early on, but we quickly abandoned it once we had more and more layers coming in, removing that to make space for everything, which is one of the things that I talked about on the first track, was that we just didn't really have space or placement for everything. They were pretty much put into 2 camps rather than allowed to be placed all throughout in order to create space for all the sounds to be heard. And here, there is plenty of space. We have a variety of pitches being utilized. We utilize the entire spectrum of the x-axis from left to right panning, center panning. And we have a variety of sounds as well. And so what it does is it opens up room. There is plenty of places to put the instruments in this mix, and so they all kind of get their own area. It does become a little cluttered towards the end, but I think that was more by design than by running out of space. They wanted it to feel a little bit more cluttered for whatever reason. I'm not sure what that is yet. But there's too many intentional decisions here, particularly with the mix and the placement of instruments, the staging of everything, that it would feel very weird to me for them to have just accidentally landed on something a bit more claustrophobic towards the end of the track. And so we have a song here that feels very much like its predecessor, but only on like the most surface level ideas. And it takes all those and runs them in a completely different direction, explores a very different style of composition and production on top of a very similar idea. And it does allow this song to feel like the other side of the coin from our first song, a sort of yin and yang style going on here. And I appreciate that. There's a lot of ways to do a second part of a song. And I think this is one of my favorites, which is sort of a reinterpretation of it. Not necessarily to add on to it, but to showcase an inversion of it in a lot of ways. I'm curious if there aren't more ideas that are adapted from the original into this song. Like I said, I'm still kind of 50-50 on that opening rhythm, but it did feel familiar. But I don't think that there were any melodies or riffs in here that felt familiar to me enough that I would say, oh, that probably came from the first track. I'm curious if there's going to be any lyrics that got carried over, but so far it feels like it takes the skeleton of the first song and fills out the track in a different way. So there is that structural comparison, but the songs are very different as far as I can tell compositionally. Yeah, I think that's it. I'm gonna hit some lyrics here. We're gonna see what's going on there, and then we will wrap the video up. All right. First of all, a little embarrassing. The group is just called Sunset Rubdown. I thought the comma was part of the band name, but it's actually to separate artists. Spencer Krug is the lead vocalist and creator of the band. Maybe does other stuff as well. I didn't do a lot of research on it. I just noticed that when I hovered over it in must have been Spotify, it was two separate artists. And I was like, oh. So the group's just Sunset Rubdown. I'll make sure I put that correct in the description and the title of the video, but yeah, I've been saying that wrong for like 40 minutes now. On the topic of lyrics, though, there's a lot of revisited lyrics, and they do have a new perception, a new angle to them. For instance, I'd like to think the actors never banded, and I'd like to throw this trumpet down and go on empty-handed. We revisit that idea here, except afterwards it says, and I'd like to think I am not one of them, but I know I am, so I'd like to just follow you a while. If this person was the director of the play last time and felt distanced from that, they're now in a position where they no longer want to lead. And we actually see that right at the start. It says, you go on ahead for a while, I'd like to follow you a while. The idea of stepping down and deciding not to see, here's the thing too. Again, context. I don't have the whole story. I wonder if the division between him and the actors was because of some sort of superiority complex of being the leader. I'm the director. We're going to do things my way. And it created strife there, where here he takes a step down, finds himself a little bit more humble, and says, I'm willing to learn now. But regardless, that line about putting the trumpet down and going empty-handed feels different now. It's about laying down what you are and following in the footsteps of someone else. To take the time to learn rather than to teach. Now, there's still a lot of stuff in here I don't get. However, the idea of virgins comes back up. The general idea here is that they're walking through a desert. I don't know if it's probably also metaphorical, right? But it says, see the sirens and the lizards lick their tongues behind the stage. See the actor keep their ritual to keep them all at bay. He would like to come home naked without war paint on his face and appear before you virgin white if virgins are still chaste. In the other track, he asked if the virgin role had been filled, and if not, then he would fill it. Something I didn't catch there, and I didn't notice until here when someone pointed it out on this set of lyrics, is that the term virgin could be applied to somebody who is new to love in general and hasn't had their heart broken in any way, and they still have this bright-eyed view of what being in love could be. And so if we paint that onto the narrator, they want to be back in this mode. They still want to have all of this positive energy to the love of their craft here. And they got kind of beaten down by doing all the directorial work. And they just want to reignite their love, their passion for this art again. And he says he doesn't want to go home with war paint on his face anymore. He just wants to be that virgin again. He wants to come in fresh, ready to, enjoy, presumably, the art of making stage of theater again. And a lot of this comes to a realization of time passing us by. The end of the song is a repetition. It says, if there are 2 eyes in my head, there are 4 seasons in a year, and reflections on the water of a burning yellow sphere. The days add up to weeks, which add up to months, and add up to years. Time is something inescapable. I don't want to be that person I was previously the rest of my life. It's short. Let's make the best of it, is what I get from this. And I think it's a wonderful reflection on the lyrics of the last song and the themes they explored, while also presenting a character who is growing along these songs. I think that's fascinating. And so it is a song about trying to be better than you were, about letting people in and building connection. And so the song ends up being more positive, not just in its feeling. It's not as noisy or as chaotic and dissonant as the first track, but it also makes sense. Everything is working together to build up something more positively, not just in tone, but also in sound. It all just comes together really well. I think that's my final thought on this. And I love that I got to listen to these back to back here, because I would not have made these connections otherwise. So those are my thoughts on Sunset Rubdown's Trumpet Trumpet Toot Toot and Trumpet Trumpet II, You Go On Ahead. Let me know what your thoughts are, though. Did you enjoy these tracks? Is there anything that stood out to you, maybe that you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Maybe just have your own thoughts, opinions, and perspective on this song that you'd like to share. Put all that stuff down in the comments section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. It takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all 3 of those. Alright, that wraps it up for today, but I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC. We're going to check out some special selections. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.